On GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's Tuesday, the 4th of July. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday morning. Now, Rip-Off Britain strikes again. I can't say we're very surprised. The latest today, supermarkets face accusations of petrol profiteering. And the watchdog summons the banks to find out why saving rates aren't rising quicker.
And talking of cash cows, London Mayor Sadiq Khan's hated, in my view, ULEZ scheme expansion. It's being challenged by 5 Conservative councils in court today.
And as we increasingly face a cashless society, GB News launches our first ever campaign, Don't Kill Cash. That's right, the People's Channel is fighting to save the pound in your pocket and stop financial exclusion.
That's a great campaign. And we're heading back to Scotland this morning as the King continues with his first Holyrood week in Edinburgh since becoming the monarch. We'll have all the latest.
Got a petition running for that Don't Kill Cash campaign.
And what about my chequebook? I want to keep that too. I know people think I'm old-fashioned, but I like my cash and I like my chequebook.
We're not going to start a campaign.
Okay. Just stick to the cash campaign.
Checkbook. But you know what? That's part of it. Keeping cash is so important. It's so important for people who do lots of jobs and rely on cash for budgeting. So we'll tell you all about that in the show. Let us know your thoughts. gbnews@gbnews.com is the email address. But first of all, here is your news with Aaron.
Good morning to you. It's 9:34. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB Newsroom. Energy companies have been warned they could face penalties if they prioritise investors over customers. Ofgem says it will take action against suppliers that abuse pricing rules. It comes as wholesale energy prices have begun to ease and domestic suppliers are expected to return to profit. Ofgem says the firms should focus first on maintaining their financial resilience rather than paying out dividends to shareholders. The Financial Conduct Authorities called a meeting with the major banks over allegations of profiteering. The CEOs from HSBC, NatWest, Lloyds and Barclays have been summoned to discuss concerns surrounding interest rates. MPs are pushing for increased savings rates and they've criticised banks for lagging behind in that when it comes to the rising cost of mortgages. The Foreign Secretary's criticised the Hong Kong police's decision to issue arrest warrants for 8 overseas activists. James Cleverly says the UK won't tolerate China's attempt to intimidate those individuals, and the UK is committed to defending the universal right to freedom of expression. Authorities in Hong Kong claim the activists are encouraging sanctions against China and are aiming to undermine the region's stability. And the last surviving member of the French commando unit that landed on the Normandy beaches during the D-Day invasion has died at the age of 100. Leon Gaultier played a vital role in the liberation of France from German occupation in 1944. President Emmanuel Macron says Gaultier and his comrades were heroes of the liberation and their memory will be preserved. That's it for the moment. More in our later bulletins and more on our website, gbnews.com. But now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining us. Our top story this morning, the government has accused supermarkets of treating customers like cash cows after the Competition and Markets Authority found that drivers were being charged an extra 6p per litre of fuel.
That's almost £1 billion a year they've been coining it from us in 1 year. And it's not just supermarkets, because Britain's banks have been called in to meet the financial watchdog on Thursday over accusations of profiteering.
So joining us now for more on this is Deputy Political Editor Tom Harwood. Good morning, Tom, down at Westminster. This is bad news for the government, because in many ways it just looks like the corporations are acting entirely within their own interests, and it's we, the British public, who are suffering. But is there a lot that they can do when we live in a capitalist society?
Well, we do to some extent, but also the news headlines we're seeing today are to some extent the result of that meeting last week when the Chancellor brought in all of those different regulators, Ofgem, Ofwat, all the rest of them, into Number 11 and gave them a bit of a talking to. Now we're seeing some reports from those bodies, and particularly let's zero in on some of them. The Competition and Markets Authority has said that supermarkets in particular are now charging almost 6p per litre more for petrol than they have historically done. What the supermarkets say to that, however, is the CMA's calculations have not included wages and have not included rents, two areas where costs for these supermarkets have risen considerably. And also it's interesting to look at the idea of supermarkets compared to other fuel retailers. Supermarkets have traditionally had lower prices, subsidised by the rest of their operation to try and get customers into their areas and shop in the rest of their business. Perhaps that cross-subsidy has reduced ever so slightly as the input costs for food retailers in particular have gone up so much. It's not just inflation that we're seeing on the shelves, but it's also inflation in the production side of things that is affecting all areas of this too. So lots of different arguments on lots of different sides here, but ultimately no one's better off.
And the solution, particularly to the petrol problem, Tom, is what? This involves an app, effectively increasing transparency for the customer of what price is available.
Well, this is the proffered solution. No one can really say if it will work that well or not, but ultimately greater transparency so that people can see the price at the pumps near them. There are already a number of services that consumers can access to compare the prices at various pumps in their local area or further afield in this country, but there is no sort of statutory backing to those services. They're sometimes a little bit out of date in terms of what the very latest price at the pump is, and what the proposal is here is that it would be a statutory duty for any retailer of petrol or diesel to update their prices so that everyone could see it in sort of one central system and people could know where to go to get the best price and facilitate that sort of competition.
Tom, on the petrol, one of the problems, Asda used to be the market leader with the supermarkets, often running petrol fuel sales as a loss leader. They've, of course, have new owners now, and those new owners own a lot of petrol stations. Is that part of where the problem has been? They've put the prices up, and rather than other supermarkets cutting their prices, they've drifted upwards too.
Yes, no doubt that sort of loss-leading cross-subsidisation that we were seeing more of in previous years has reduced, and no doubt Asda has played a large part in that. But ultimately, I don't think we can pin the blame on one company or another here. The ability of companies to do that sort of cross-subsidisation of various elements of their business has got less as the general inflation picture that this country is suffering under has increased. Of course, if you look at the inputs going into supermarkets, the stuff that they buy wholesale, those prices are up. And in some areas, actually, if we look at, for example, bread, the price of bread on the shelves has risen by some degree, but not by as much as the price of wheat has at the input. So those costs are being absorbed somewhere, perhaps by producers, perhaps by retailers. But ultimately, it means that money is being squeezed out of the system, and that means that the consumer at the end of it is worse off.
Don't we think these retailers, supermarkets, are complaining too much, Tom? We've just seen today Sainsbury's announcing in the last quarter sales rose by 10%, 9.8%, 10% effectively.
Yes, I haven't seen if that is sales by product volume or sales by cash volume. Of course, if it's sales just in money terms, that would likely be expected given the general food inflation environment that we've seen in the country. What we do know, however, is that companies, particularly supermarkets, run a very small margin of profit compared to lots of other industries. Typically between 2 and 3% is the profit margin for supermarkets, and they make money by simply selling a lot of stuff rather than selling less stuff at a higher profit. So this is quite a competitive market as things stand.
That's our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood. Thanks for talking to Tom, and I think we'll be talking to him a little later in the programme too.
That's right. So continuing on this issue, actually, about motorists being used as cash cows, responding to the report, Energy Secretary Grant Shapps has said it wasn't right that the big four supermarkets, Asda, Morrisons, Tesco and Sainsbury's, were making tens of millions off the back of hard-working people.
Well, joining us this morning for more on this petrol profiteering is the consumer journalist Harry Wallop. Harry, supermarkets, we were talking earlier to Tom Harwood, as you know, you often ran petrol fuel as a loss leader. Now they're not. They're getting much more profit out of the petrol tank.
Yeah, that's right. So famously, Asda, for many, many years, actually even before they were owned by the US giant Walmart, decided to sell petrol just to get customers into store. And they would sell petrol for, tiny amounts of profit. Didn't bother them. People would come and then do their weekly shop. And Asda for many years were the price leader before essentially Aldi and Lidl came along. Now, two things happened. One, Aldi and Lidl don't sell petrol. So I'm sure if they did, they would be slashing prices and trying to win customers that way. Instead, they do it on their food and drink. The other thing that happened was that, as you alluded to, Andrew, Asda has changed hands, and so too has Morrison. And Asda and Morrisons have been named in this, this huge report by the competition authorities as two supermarkets who have dramatically increased the margin they make on petrol from a very small amount to quite a substantial amount. So Asda has tripled the amount of margin it makes on petrol, and Morrisons have doubled it. Now, from quite a low base, admittedly, but nonetheless, that is a big, big deal. And crucially, the other supermarkets are just as much to blame, because instead of trying to compete on low prices, they thought, well, we'll just drift up our prices too.
And they've been found out, haven't they, by the competition authority for charging consumers an extra 6p a litre. That works out, apparently, the sales over a year of nearly £1 billion, Harry. That's a lot of extra money going in the supermarket's back pocket.
Yeah, absolutely. It's £900 million over a 3-year period, and diesel drivers, did even worse this year. They really have been ripped off. Now, as Tom said earlier, the supermarkets will claim, well, look, we are publicly owned companies, and we have to make money, and we were being hammered by food inflation, so we decided to make a bit more money from petrol to try and lower prices on food and drink. But, we, the consumer, ultimately have lost out either way.
I think, Harry, what really sort of sticks in the craw is the idea that all of us filling up at the pump will have thought, oh, this is because of the war in Ukraine. You know, we've all been told this is because of Putin, this is because... And actually, I feel like we've been taken advantage of because of the news agenda, and that the supermarkets somehow just thought they could get away with it. It just doesn't feel like bad business. It just feels deeply unethical. What choice do we have now as consumers, Harry?
Well, the government have launched this big report, and they've said that they're going to now force the companies to give up their data in real time so that there can be these apps. Now, so we can see where is the cheapest petrol. In fact, there are apps available already. I mean, the most famous one is something called petrolprices.com, and it's pretty decent. The issue is that it's not updated on a daily basis, and supermarkets are not forced to give their data. It's kind of done by a third party. But it does show how dramatically different the prices of petrol can be in certain areas. So you need to, we do need to, use our wallets and give our custom to companies that are going to sell cheaper petrol than elsewhere. The issue, of course, with petrol is it just became less competitive.
Yeah.
The fact that Asda decided not to compete on price just destroyed the market.
I hear what you say about the app, Tom. There are some people like me who can't stand all these apps, and I'm thinking of a lot of older people listening to this programme and watching it on TV think, I don't do apps, so how's that going to help me?
Well, I think an increasing number of people do, and they're sort of built into their sat-navs on their car. What we can see, hopefully, is what you see in Europe, which is billboards on the side of the road, which display all the forthcoming petrol stations in, say, the next 50 miles and the prices right now at the petrol station. In the UK, you pull into a motorway service station. It's only when you pull in, you see that they're trying to charge, I don't know, £1.83 for unleaded. You think, oh my gosh, but you've got a nearly empty tank. You've already turned off the motorway. You can't be bothered to go back on for another 15 miles in the hope, but not the certainty, you might get cheaper petrol. So it's all about transparency. If the companies are forced to display their petrol in real time on as many different platforms as possible, be it on a billboard or be it on an app, it will force people to drive to the cheaper supermarket, and they will get the custom, and others hopefully will cut prices to follow suit.
One of the downsides, of course, of the supermarket selling all this petrol, Harry, is I just looked at this figure today. More than 4,000 independent petrol stations have closed in the last 12 years. And that's a real blow. These are small businesses that used to be the backbone of the country.
Yeah, I mean, that is a real issue. Absolutely. So supermarkets about 15 years ago had about a third of the whole petrol market, and now it's nearly half of the petrol market. Despite what we're saying about petrol, it used to be quite difficult to make money out of petrol. You'd make your money from selling the newspapers and the fizzy drinks alongside the petrol. And the supermarkets muscled in, they did cut prices, and it is worth pointing out that even though Asda has been named as the bad boy in this report, they are still the cheapest place to get petrol. They're just not that much cheaper than than all the others compared with previously. But yeah, independents have left the market, and that's made it less competitive. And that, we need competition. Competition works as a general rule. It just failed in this instance.
Yeah. OK.
Great show.
Brilliant. Thank you, Harry. Harry Wallop, their consumer expert. My family business growing up was a garage petrol station.
Was it really?
My grandfather started with a bucket of fuel in like 1920-something and thought, I think these cars are going to catch on.
Well, he was dead right.
And then he got a bucket of fuel and it went round the village. And Mr. Turner's got a bucket of fuel. And then he got to a barrel and then he put a tank in the floor. And then we had a business that ran for over 100 years selling petrol.
And is it still going?
No, and then Mum and Dad, exactly what Harry was saying,
Yeah.
there was no money in petrol. But he also fixed cars and did MOTs, and that was kind of where he managed to make a living. But in the end, it just wasn't worth selling the petrol. And
very sad, because they were a really important part of the community, weren't they?
the garage is still there. Rain's filling station in Manchester, if you're interested. But they did sell it and retired. But anyway, right, moving on.
Yeah. Now, in the wake of the COVID pandemic, more and more shops, cafes and pubs, to my fury, are choosing to only accept card payments.
Britain is fast becoming a cashless society, and with the rise of online payment methods, vulnerable people who rely on cash are increasingly being left behind by the relentless march of technology.
So here at GB News, we've launched a petition to prevent a cashless society.
I'm so proud of this. It's on our website, gbnews.com/cash. Or if you've got a smartphone, use it on the QR code on your screen right now to take you to the petition. If you don't know, that's opening your camera. Dan Falvey is here So, Dan, if you're looking at this now from our digital team, if you open up your camera on your phone and you just scan that, don't you? And then that will take you to the petition.
Absolutely. If you hold up your camera to the screen, you put it over that code there, and it should flash up with a little link that you can click, and it will take you directly to the petition that you can sign to get behind this GB News campaign, our first campaign.
And how's it going? Great campaign.
It's gone fantastically. We have to say the support from the GB News viewers and readers has been absolutely fantastic. We only launched this yesterday afternoon, and already more than 30,000 people have signed this petition, which is absolutely fantastic. And this all started really just a couple of weeks ago. Rishi Sunak was asked in the House of Commons by a Conservative MP, would he help ensure that cash continued to have to be accepted by businesses to help the elderly, the vulnerable, those who don't have access to bank accounts. And he said, this is up to individual businesses and for individual businesses to decide. And we at GB News said, that's not enough. That's right. We need to take action on this, and it's great to see so many people getting behind it.
What a populist issue he could have got behind.
It's very much against the direction of travel for the technocrat, though, isn't it? This is not, and he would see cash as outdated, old-fashioned. It's a route to freedom, Dan. It's not just about the vulnerable. For me, I want the freedom to make a transaction without always being watched and surveilled. That's now suddenly become too much to ask, it feels.
Absolutely. And Rishi Sunak, he is the one who wants to introduce this digital pound. It's been a big thing. This Bitcoin, which he says wouldn't replace the sterling, but it would work alongside it. But it would very much be this digital currency. It can track what you're doing. You can track where people are going. So there's problems and concerns on a privacy point of view.
Absolutely.
There's concerns for the vulnerable, be it elderly people, and let's talk about things such as car parking. Elderly people who might go and want to park their car to go for a walk around the local park, and they're now told you can't pay for your car parking in cash. You now need to phone up or use an app.
It's so complicated, and that is so complicated. And also, I've got a couple of great greasy spoons I like to go to for a bacon and eggs. I always pay cash, and I always give them a tip in cash.
It's tips as well.
Because if you give tips on the card, you're always worried it's going to go straight into the owner's pocket and not the hard-working waiter or waitress.
Absolutely. And also, let's also not forget how charities can suffer from this, because how often do you see someone collecting money for charity and you put your hand in your pocket and you put in a little bit of cash? If you've got no cash anymore, you can't do that. Now, charities have tried to adapt by letting you do card payments, but I just don't think they're going to get the same uptake with people saying, I'm willing to now put it down and put in a £5 or something, as saying, actually, I've not got much, but I'll give you the 30p that's in my pocket.
I know, I don't know often you use the tube, Dan, but the buskers now, increasingly, they have tap your card, have a card reader, because so few people have cash. It's just desperate.
If you look at what a cashless society does, who does it benefit? It benefits the big organisations, it benefits the corporations. It's that same movement of travel that we've been discussing about, a top-down world in which we've got this transfer of wealth to the top, and it doesn't benefit small businesses, hairdressers, like you say, waiters. And OK, Rishi Sunak might say, well, those people might be fiddling their tax and not declaring all their tips. Well, let's talk about that. Let's have a conversation about that. But the problem is, it feels like this idea that we're just going to be cashless. No one's discussed it. It hasn't been debated sufficiently in Parliament, clearly, either.
Absolutely.
And it suits the banks who are closing these cash point machines. 300 a month are closing down because they don't want to have to maintain them, because that's too much inconvenience and it costs them money.
Absolutely. And that is why GB News, as the People's Channel, have got behind this for the regular people, for normal people, hard-working people up and down the country. And we would say gbnews.com/cash, sign the petition. And also, we want to hear how have people been let down by the cashless society. Let us know, gbviews@gbnews.com, and let us hear your stories.
Yes, we can sign that petition, and then we can show it to the Prime Minister. He then may change his view next time he's tackled about this in the Commons.
We've got to try something. We have to try
really
something.
Important.
The fundamental change to our socio-economic landscape, once we have no privacy to buy and sell our goods without a bank or a government watching us, is a fundamental change to our humanity.
I think it was 2017, the cards took over from cash as the way people are paying most, and now they're miles ahead, aren't they?
I'm not saying it's not bad, we just want a choice. Dan, thank you.
And I always buy my newspapers in the newsagent with cash. Of course I do.
I was at the House of Commons last night. Guess what? As I was walking out, guess what they had inside the building? 3 cash points.
They do.
Cash points inside the House of Commons. Well, you've clearly got access to cash.
10,000 people work there.
Yeah,
That's
well,
the point.
excellent.
And you don't have to pay in them
Sign our
either.
petition. We're going to be talking to Liam Halligan as well about that in just a moment. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel.
Good morning. It stays rather changeable across the UK as we head through the next few days, with some further showers to come through today. There will be some sunshine in between, but it will still be staying rather cool for the early part of July. We look at the pressure pattern then, it's still low pressure dominating our weather. Some fairly tightly packed isobars as well. That's what's keeping things fairly breezy. And these weather fronts here that you can see, that's what's going to bring some more organised bands of showery rain as we head through Tuesday. So looking a bit more detail then, we pick up on some fairly heavy showery rain affecting some southern counties of England and Wales. That pepping up as we head through the morning. Some organised showery rain affecting parts of southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England. That will slowly spread its way southwards. But in between the two, there will be some sunshine with just one or two scattered showers. And that rain really continuing across the southeastern corner as we head into the middle part of the afternoon, turning a little bit brighter though from the west. Temperatures still on the cool side, like I said. We're looking at highs of 14 across northern Scotland to 20 or 21 degrees in the south. And I think feeling particularly cool underneath that showery rain. Now, as we head through the evening then, that rain pepping up for a time across the far southeast before it then clears away. Elsewhere, probably many of the showers will fade away, one or two continuing as we head through the night, but under those clear skies it will turn fairly cool for many of us, particularly in more countryside, where we're looking at lows in towns and cities of 7 to 14 degrees there in the south. So we get off for many areas to a brighter start on Wednesday morning with some sunshine from the word go. A better start to the day across the south of England and Wales. I think as we head through the day, the chance of some showers developing once again. These again could be on the heavy side with the risk of hail and thunder, but in between those showers, as I said, some further sunshine to come. Winds won't be quite as strong as they have been of late, and so in any sunshine it shouldn't feel too bad despite the fact temperatures just below where they should be. Highs of 13 across Orkney and Shetland to 21 degrees there across the southeast. Quick look ahead to the rest of the week. It stays rather changeable with a mixture of sunshine and showers, but as we head through the week, temperatures start to warm up across the southeast. We could see highs of 26 degrees there by the time we get through to Friday.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
10 a.m. on Tuesday, the 4th of July. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce.
And welcome to Rip Off Britain. The latest today, supermarkets are facing accusations of petrol profiteering, and the watchdog is summoning the banks to find out why savings rates aren't rising as quick as mortgage rates.
Good question. Talking of cash cows, London Mayor Sadiq Khan's ULEZ scheme expansion is being challenged by 5 Conservative councils this morning. They're raising concerns, of course, about the impact on businesses and local communities. They're in court. We'll have all the latest.
And a great campaign, because as we face an increasingly cashless society, GB News has launched its first campaign, Don't Kill Cash. The People's Channel. We're fighting to save the pound in your pocket and stop financial exclusion. There's a petition, got to sign it.
And we're going to be heading back to Scotland this morning as the King continues with his first Hollywood week in Edinburgh since becoming monarch. We'll have all the latest as it happens. We're also going to have Tonya Buxton and Nigel Nelson in the studio to go through some big stories of the day. Let us know your thoughts. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address, as always. But first, here is the very latest news with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good morning to you. It's 2 minutes past 10. Let's get you up to date with the headlines from the GB Newsroom. Energy companies could face penalties if they prioritise investors over customers. Ofgem says suppliers should focus on maintaining financial resilience rather than paying out dividends to shareholders, and it will take action if pricing rules are abused. It comes as wholesale prices have begun to ease and companies are expected to return to profit. But the former boss of Energy UK, Angela Knight, says it's not just the supplier's fault.
Regulators generally, though, have been a little bit asleep at the wheel, whether it's water, whether it's energy. And I think that financial regulation is these days extremely complicated. And what they can do on the one hand, which is say to banks, you've got to hold more capital, on the other, makes it harder for them to put up the savings rates. But regulators do have a part to play. And I don't think that they have stood in properly over not just this last year, but over several years.
The UK's 4 major banks have been summoned to a meeting with the financial watchdog over allegations of profiteering. The FCA regulator will question the bosses of HSBC, NatWest, Lloyds and Barclays over low levels of interest on easy access savings, which are lagging behind the cost of mortgages. The average savings rate on easy access is 2.43%, while the average 2-year mortgage rate is 6.42%. Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, says there's no financial economic stability.
Very concerning, and it's like rolling financial thunder, this. The rates are going up and up, particularly over the past month or so, and every month there's about 200,000 more people coming off a 2 or a 5-year fixed rate. It might have been fixed in the past at something like 2%. And they're now coming on to the kind of rates that you've just quoted. It's going to cost families hundreds of pounds a month when they renew these deals.
Education union leaders are calling on the government to release the pay review body's recommendations. The National Education Union says the delay is causing anxiety and frustration amongst schools and head teachers who need to plan budgets. Teachers are striking tomorrow and Friday over the ongoing pay dispute. The government previously offered a £1,000 one-off payment and a 4.5% average rise for next year. That offer was rejected. A helpline's been launched for homeless veterans in England, Scotland and Wales. The government's funded initiative aims to connect former servicemen and women with housing providers, charities and local authorities. Over £8.5 million has been invested into the service and a website in an effort to end veterans sleeping rough. The Home Secretary will meet senior sporting figures and police leaders to address concerns about disruptive protests at summer events. Suella Braverman and Sports Secretary Lucy Fraser aim to find solutions to counter-demonstrations from groups like Just Stop Oil and Animal Rising. It's after events including the rugby final at Twickenham, the Ashes and the World Snooker Championship have been affected in recent months. The Foreign Secretary has criticised the Hong Kong police's decision to issue arrest warrants for 8 overseas activists. James Cleverly says China is attempting to intimidate those individuals and the UK will not tolerate such actions. He says the UK remains committed to defending the universal right to freedom of expression. It comes after the Hong Kong police said the activists encourage sanctions against China and have tried to undermine the region's stability. Ryanair cancelled over 900 flights in June because of air traffic control strikes in France. The industrial action, which lasted throughout the month, resulted in approximately 160,000 passengers being affected. Despite the disruptions, Ryanair reported a 9% year-on-year increase in passenger numbers, and they were carrying a total of 17.4 million passengers last month. Universities in the UK will announce plans to incorporate AI into their curriculum and assessments. The Russell Group has published a set of principles to help universities support the ethical and responsible use of AI tools. Vice-Chancellors for 24 Russell Group universities, that includes Oxford, Cambridge and Bristol, say they hope to help students with real-world applications of the technology. And the last surviving member of the French commando unit that landed on the Normandy beaches during the D-Day invasion has died at the age of 100. Leon Gaultier played a vital role in the liberation of France from German occupation in 1944. The French President Emmanuel Macron has paid tribute to Gaultier and his comrades, acknowledging them as heroes of the liberation. He's vowed their memory will be preserved. That's it for the moment here on GB News. More as it happens, but now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Good morning. This is Britain's Newsroom with Bev and Andrew. Now, it is 6 months today since Prime Minister Rishi Sunak set out his government's 5 pledges to get Britain back on track.
And remember, he said he was going to deliver on them within 12 months. So they were. Drum roll, please. Halve inflation, grow the economy, bring down debt, cut the NHS waiting list and stop the boat. Well, that went well.
Well, half a year on, how are those pledges looking? Well, joining us now for his assessment is Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. Henry, good morning. I get the giggles about this kind of thing because what happens when politicians make a very good, strong statement about the things they're going to do, and this was a comms success at the time, we understood what he stood for. If you don't achieve them, there is egg on your face, is there not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things about politics is that you can do these kind of mark your own homework initiatives where you decide the metrics by which the voters should judge you at the next election. And at the time, it did contrast, it seemed favourably. You had Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges, which were really granular and specific, and crucially, you could tell whether he hit them or not. Whereas, Sir Keir Starmer was talking about his national missions, but he couldn't really tell us what they were going to be yet, and there was no detail. But yeah, as you say, you do make a rod for your own back if you don't actually end up hitting them. And unfortunately, the problem with things this specific is you're at the mercy of events. And as so far, we're 6 months in, Rishi Sunak hasn't hit any of them, and it's questionable whether he'll have managed to hit one in 6 months' time.
And if he doesn't hit them, Henry, he's not going to be forgiven, is he? Because Labour will crawl all over it. And I know you wrote in Conservative Home the other day, didn't you? Are the Conservatives now in a death spiral? And if they don't hit any of these targets, you may be right.
Yeah, this was a piece I did for the Daily Telegraph, where I said ultimately the problem with things like that, with very specific stuff, is that you're totally at the mercy of anything that happens to go wrong. So NHS waiting times, that must have looked pretty simple coming off the pandemic, got hit by the strikes. Inflation went off the charts. Small boats was always going to be tricky, but they've had setbacks in court. Economic growth, they're having to induce a recession to try and combat inflation. And the problem for Rishi Sunak is that he's basically doing the same thing that Ed Miliband did in 2015, which is sort of micro-targeting policies. And these policies might poll well individually. This is what Labour found in that election. Lots of their policies were popular. But if the public don't buy into you and you don't have a kind of bigger vision to set those policies in and contextualize them, then the voters aren't going to buy it at all. And so I think actually Rishi is suffering from the fact that he hasn't set out a big vision. He hasn't given Tory voters or MPs or activists something to believe in, to fight for when things get difficult.
I was at a reception the other night, Henry, I don't know if you were there. A lot of Tory MPs were there. The mood was funereal. There was just an acceptance, it seems, that a lot of MPs now will stand down at the next general election, and that very few people think that there's anything left in the tank that the Prime Minister can produce to kickstart their position in the polls. And as you point out, Jeremy Hunt is talking about engineering a recession to get rid of inflation. Well, you're not going to win an election that way.
No, absolutely. And, you know, on the one hand, the government has this 2019 pledge, which follows a string of pledges about bringing down net migration. But on the other hand, every department other than the Home Office keeps agitating for more immigration, because immigration is a short-term hit. You know, it boosts numbers, it solves problems. So the government has huge problems. Rishi Sunak in particular, he's possibly come into Downing Street in the weakest position of any Prime Minister in modern times. You know, he only came in on the second attempt. He junked nearly everything that made his first leadership pitch distinctive in terms of policy. He had to inherit his Chancellor. No one feels they've committed to Sunakism. And I think that perhaps the biggest loss of this is that if you look back to, you know, you can actually do an awful lot if you have a big majority and you know you're going to lose the next election. You know, as the song has it, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Labour only passed the Equality Act, a hugely consequential piece of legislation, in 2010. So in theory, this could be a time when the Prime Minister drives through some perhaps unpopular but necessary reforms. But unfortunately, he's not doing that. He's not been able to unite the parliamentary party behind him on anything. And so the Tories are wasting what could be the last 18 months of the last majority they get for a while, when they could be doing quite a lot of stuff.
Keir Starmer at the moment, Harry, just doesn't have to do anything, does he? All he has to do is stay quiet in the background, not create any sort of controversy, probably answer questions like, what is a woman, in a fairly straightforward manner. Otherwise, he just has to sit back and watch these 5 pledges become unfulfilled, doesn't he?
Yeah, this is the classic kind of small c conservative, cautious way that the oppositions fight elections. You know, you're carrying a vase across a room, just don't mess anything up and let the government lose the election. Tony Blair famously repudiated this. He was like, no, we actually have to be really bold, and that means that you win a mandate for all kinds of things. And I think that maybe the problem that Starmer is going to have if he keeps being really cautious is that he needs to win a mandate, not just from the country, but also just to persuade his own MPs to do various things. So if he's too cautious, he risks finding that he's not managed to bring his party with him on some of the things that he wants to do in government. So as we get closer to the election, Labour are going to have to firm up their proposals. But yeah, ultimately, maybe Starmer could fluff this election if he went with something absolutely insane. But genuinely, all he needs to do is just give the Tories space to lose the election, because currently that's what they're going to do.
He should perhaps consider not doing quite as many U-turns, because it seems every 2 weeks we get another one, whether it's the green bank, the 28 billion they were going to spend on green issues, the tax that they were going to bring in on big digital companies like Amazon. They're junking so much, it means voters really don't know what Labour and Keir Starmer stand for.
I think the problem Labour actually have is that if you went back to the day after the general election in 2019, you could count the number of people who thought Labour would be back in with a majority after one term on the fingers of your third hand, right? Like, no one thought that. So they have been caught out by the fact the Tories have collapsed so quickly. And so I think they were in kind of a very early stage of policy making. And all of a sudden, they're having to completely gear shift because they're probably actually going to get into government. And what we're seeing from Labour is, first, they're leaking weird policy ideas because they're having to do these blue sky policy sessions and they always leak, and that's always funny. But two, they're actually having to do the hard work of trimming their plans to the economic and fiscal reality that they're going to face in government. It's really easy in opposition to come up with loads of high spending initiatives that sound really popular. But actually what this shows, these U-turns, which aren't great for Starmer's image, but what they do show is that Starmer and his Treasury team are actually looking at the numbers and being like, okay, we can't afford this, we can't afford this, we can't afford this. And I think one of the most promising medium-term things for the Tories, if Labour do get in this time, is there really is absolutely no money, right? So Labour are going to come in, and unlike in 97 when they inherited a strong economy and high tax receipts from Ken Clarke, they're not going to be able to do much of what they want to do, and it might disappoint the electorate.
And it's funny you should mention that, Henry, because there are some Tory MPs who say we should lose the next general election because the legacy we will bequeath to the next Labour government will be so awful, they could be out after only one term.
Yeah, that is potentially true. I mean, I'm always cautious about anyone saying they should win an election because there were Tories saying that before 1997, and that took them a long time to come back. Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely not an ideal circumstance for Labour to take power by any means.
OK, all right. Thank you, Henry Hill there. I'm just looking at this from Conservative. Yeah. I'm just looking at this as well, the front page of the Daily Express today. So we had on Ben Hunt yesterday, who was one of the MPs, one of these... Tom Hunt, sorry. Yeah. One of these new Conservatives, as they're called. And the papers the Express particularly, our very own Sam Lister, who's one of our panellists every week, has splashed on this today about the fact that there is this split now in the Tory party, and this is the last thing that Rishi Sunak needs. Yeah, because to people like Tom Hunt say we've got to cut immigration. It was 606,000 last year. The government said they'd get it back to the levels it was in 2019. That was 200,000, so 400,000 they want out, and Rishi Sunak won't have it because the Treasury want cheap immigration coming in because it's cheap employment. Yeah. And that's the problem. You've been getting in touch this morning. We're talking about these fuel prices and the fact that the supermarkets have been found to have been effectively price gouging at our expense. And Peter said, why the attack on supermarkets and their fuel prices? Yes, they've increased, but the main petrol companies have been outrageous in their prices for years. Shell, BP, Texaco, etc.
Yeah, David makes the point. Very good point, David. There's no bigger organisation than the government for treating motorists as a cash cow. Yes, how much duty is on every litre of fuel? It's enormous.
And the prime architect also for me, I mean, in terms of local government, is Sadiq Khan as well, who's doing this in London. And as we speak, the judicial review into the expansion of ULEZ is taking place, and we're going to be bringing you the solution on that. And Mel says the resolution to the supermarket rip-off is simple. Use an app to find the cheapest in your area and use that petrol station. Even if I have to drive several miles, I support the petrol station who gives the cheapest fuel. Customers should vote with their feet. It just so much puts the onus on the customer.
And also, if you're driving around looking for cheaper petrol, aren't you just running up more costs because you're using more petrol?
And you have to have one of these, otherwise you don't know how cheap the petrol is.
Sometimes I'm so glad I don't have a car, because I don't.
Now, moving on this morning, we've got a lot to come still today. We've got Liam Halligan is coming in here. How could I have forgotten that? He's going to be discussing the dangers of this cashless world for the vulnerable. We feel very strongly about it.
We do. Don't get me started on my checkbook.
Yeah, this is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. It's 10:22. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So the bosses of the country's 4 main lenders have been summoned to a meeting with the financial watchdog as they face pressure to raise measly easy access savings rates.
So the Financial Conduct Authority, to give it its full title, wants chief executives from HSBC, NatWest, Lloyds and Barclays to come to see them on Thursday amid allegations of blatant profiteering.
So, of course, GB News is also launching a new campaign to prevent a cashless society. Don't kill cash. It's on our website, gbnews.com/cash, or if you've got a smartphone, use it to click on the QR code on your screen right now to take you to the petition.
Well, launching this campaign is our economic and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. We're so excited about this campaign.
Well, I think this is exactly what GB News should be doing.
Yeah.
And we'll come to the campaign just to say the banks are for the high jumpers you want. They've been asked to go or ordered to go to the headmaster's study. We'll see what happens. But it's been the case for years and years and years that as soon as interest rates go up, the Bank of England puts up interest rates. Immediately, as lenders, mortgage companies, the banks, within 24 hours, the mortgage rate goes up. You got the letter plopping on your doormat by the end of the week, haven't you? And yet when it comes to putting up rates for savers, it can take months and months and months, if at all.
Why are they... I mean, they can get away with it because they run a business and they've got to make profits, but it seems immoral.
Well, that's a strong word, but it does feel that way for a lot of people. If you have got a little bit of money in the bank and you're not getting anything for your savings, and yet the bank is instantly charging your kids, say, more money for their mortgage, for a loan, for money that the bank raised,
and credit cards,
often years earlier. And the bank does it, of course, to widen its margin. But we're also looking closely at the banks here on GB News, and we're looking closely at the financial services industry in general, because we are launching this campaign, Don't Kill Cash. Why? Because we've had so many emails and tweets and letters from GB News viewers and listeners that they are sick and tired that they can't use cash anymore. And clearly there are big vested interests who don't use cash because it costs businesses money to handle cash. There's the counting of it, there's the security aspects of it. And also, if we're using a lot less cash, then that means there's more so-called surveillance capitalism, where the banks can follow your patterns of expenditure, internet companies can follow your patterns of expenditure, and then, of course, that data can be sold to third-party companies who are interested in marketing.
And if you take it to its logical conclusion, and you have a certain type of government that wants to be more authoritarian, in collaboration with the banks, they can stop your access to buying the things that you want. I mean, that's what happens in China.
They absolutely can stop access to things that you want to buy. They can introduce things like social credit systems where your behaviour determines whether or not you can spend. I'm not saying that the British government wants to do that, but there are certainly signs of that in some Asian countries, not least China, as you say. But just looking up the numbers, let's have a look at some of the numbers here when it comes to the extent to which we are cashless. Q, it's a Liam graphic, drum roll. So back in 2012, 60% of transactions used cash. And you'll remember, even, 5 years ago, my wallet always had cash in it.
Mine still does.
I knew almost exactly how much cash I had in my wallet. I couldn't tell you now, because now, in 2022, the latest numbers, these are from UK Finance, a very authoritative industry body, just 30% of transactions have used cash. I mean, that's unreal. And the prediction from UK Finance is that by 2035, we're going to be looking at less than 10% of transactions using cash.
I think that's optimistic.
And on top of that, since 2018, and we're not telling a lot of people here stuff they don't know, 20% of ATMs, those automatic teller machines where you can get cash, the hole in the wall, if you like, 20% of them have closed. So who does this affect? This really affects people without bank accounts. There are 10 or 15% of households in the UK, they're called unbanked. They haven't got the credentials or the wherewithal, unfortunately, or the ID or the income to warrant a bank account. It's the little old lady with huge respect who's trying to park in her market town in her little old car. And, she hasn't got a smartphone. You've got to download a million different apps. You need to be on Wi-Fi hotspot. What's that? I don't know. And so lots of people, particularly elderly people, or just people in a hurry, they end up getting parking tickets. They're perfectly willing to pay, but they have to get on an app.
Or they drive back home, and that means the shops are losing business again.
Or they go to the supermarket out of town. And this is a real issue. The parking apps is a real issue that's featured in our letters and correspondence with GB News viewers and listeners. And we're talking to parliamentarians too. And what's amazing is we've just, our amazing digital team here at GB News, this is very much their kind of brainchild. They've launched a petition. We've already got, within 24 hours, 37,000 signatures.
Not even.
What we need is 100,000 signatures, and then we can start pushing for a debate in Parliament. We were in Parliament last night, weren't we, Bev, talking to MPs from across parties. There's a real head of steam about this, and they're going to hopefully back our campaign.
And then hopefully Rishi Sunak will actually see for once there's an issue here where he could become popular and support it, because he was so equivocal about it.
But it will mean, Andrew, and he's not very good at this, it will mean that he's got to offend people who are kind of his own type. He's got to get the banking giants in the room, people he will have huge affinity with. He might have been at university with them, they might have worked together at Goldman Sachs in the city or wherever it is. But he is going to have to learn to offend people who are his natural, tribe, if you like.
And the Chancellor too. We need him on side.
And the Chancellor too. And this is really a test case, because it'll be very interesting to see whether or not the British government, we run the financial capital of Europe, arguably the financial capital of the world when it comes to currency transactions. And he needs to tell people, no, this is going to happen. I'm the Prime Minister, I'm telling you.
Who benefits from a cashless society, Liam?
Well, firstly, it's the businesses who don't have to pay for cash handling. Then it's the
big businesses.
The big businesses. I think also it's the kind of MasterCard, Visa, not alleging any wrongdoing from them, but it's the kind of card companies themselves. Talk to any cabbie, be it in London, Manchester, Birmingham. I've taken cabs in all those cities in the last few weeks, and every single time they've recognised me, they've said, this thing is killing me. I only want to take cash. It's becoming increasingly difficult to only take cash. I'm having to stand with punters outside cash points. I can't charge them when I'm I'm waiting for them to pay me. But every single time the cabbie takes the money, that card company gets a percentage.
Of course they do. Of course.
And it's a high percentage.
Yeah. Liam, so I want to ask you about one other issue, because, of course, this is dear to us here on GB News. Nigel Farage having his bank account closed down. 7 other banks say no, clear off. We know that Dominic Lawson wrote about this in the Daily Mail yesterday. His 16-year-old Down syndrome daughter denied a bank account because her grandfather was the former Chancellor Nigel Lawson. Even the Times say have done a lead saying it's got to stop. How have they been allowed to get away with it for so long?
It's a classic case, Andrew, of computer says no. And you need human intervention to say, actually, the computer's wrong in this case. The Down syndrome granddaughter of a deceased Chancellor.
Yeah.
I mean, just
a very distinguished...
absolutely insane that young person should be denied a bank account. Absolutely insane, that our colleague Nigel Farage should be denied a bank account. And I think he's actually up to 9 banks now that he's approached and been rejected by.
Would this computer have stopped him having the bank account if he'd backed Remain in the referendum?
It's difficult to say. There are rules that exist if you're what's called a PEP, a politically exposed person. Yeah. And, Nigel is obviously a high-profile person. But a vicar who wrote to his bank saying that he was concerned about the bank's policy on diversity and so-called woke issues.
Too many pride flags fell on their branding.
He's to have his... I mean, he wasn't expressing anything that was illegal or illegitimate in terms of his experience.
It's a legitimate opinion.
It's a view that some people will agree with. I imagine lots of people will disagree with. Yeah. But don't take the guy's bank account away. And this is the point. As we move to a cashless society, that if you can't get a bank account, there's more and more limitations. You can't function as a member of society. So how completely... ridiculous of the banks at this very moment that we are starting to talk about the cashless society to be blocking high-profile people from actually getting a bank account. It's completely tin-eared in terms of their PR strategy.
Really bad. And we should name the bank. It was Coots with Nigel Farage, which is part of NatWest, which is still partly state-owned, I think.
Which is still partly state-owned.
Out-flipping
But look, GB News viewers and listeners, sign our petition.
Absolutely.
Go to gbnews.com/cash. You can do the QR code on the screen as well. Sometimes I can never get my phone up to the screen in time. But go to gbnews.com/cash and sign our petition. And let's quickly get to that 100,000 mark of the signatures. And let's try and make a little bit of noise about this. Yeah. Because, as we always say on GB News, if it matters to you, it matters to us.
That's right. And it's a bit of a hassle sometimes to find a cash point. It's a bit of a hassle to use cash. But the implications of not having it in the system are huge. And we have to look to the long term of what the implications of this might be.
So do sign that petition as quickly as you can. Now, still to come, the review is underway today at the High Court over the Mayor of London's expansion of his ultra-low emission zone. It impacts motorists from all over the country who drive into London. We'll give you the latest on that after your morning news.
Very good morning to you. It's 10:32 here in the GB Newsroom. The average rate for a 5-year fixed-rate mortgage has now moved above 6%. The Financial Information Service, Moneyfacts, says the average 2-year fix has gone up to almost 6.5%. It comes as the UK's 4 major banks have been summoned to a meeting with the financial watchdog over allegations of profiteering. The FCA will question the bosses of HSBC, NatWest, Lloyds and Barclays over low levels of interest on savings, which are lagging behind the cost of mortgages. The average easy access savings rate is 2.43%. Energy companies have been warned they could face penalties if they prioritise investors over customers. Ofgem says suppliers should retain profits to protect consumers rather than paying out dividends to shareholders, and that action will be taken if pricing rules are abused. It comes as wholesale energy prices have begun to ease and domestic suppliers are expected to return to profit. The Foreign Secretary says the UK won't tolerate China's attempt to intimidate 8 overseas activists. Police in Hong Kong have issued arrest warrants, claiming the activists are encouraging sanctions against China and are aiming to undermine the region's stability. James Cleverly says it's a further example of the authoritarian reach of China's extraterrestrial law. And the last surviving member of the French commando unit that landed on the Normandy beaches during the D-Day invasion has died at the age of 100. Léon Gaultier played a vital role in the liberation of France from German occupation in 1944. President Emmanuel Macron says Gaultier and his comrades were heroes of the liberation and their memory will be preserved. More on all of those stories on our website, gbnews.com, and more in our later bulletins. We'll be back shortly.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Let's get you up to date with today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2699, €1.1650 euros. The price of gold, £1,519.89 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,532 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
And it's 10:38, you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So the Mayor of London will face the High Court today over his plans to expand the ultra-low emission zone known as ULEZ.
also known as a rip-off. A group of 5 Conservative councils are challenging the expansion amid concerns the scheme would harm local businesses during the ongoing cost of living crisis.
That's right. So joining us now is Gareth Bacon, Conservative MP for Orpington and a member of the London Assembly from 2008 until he stood down in 2021. Good morning, Gareth. What's your position on the ULEZ? Is it good for the air but terrible for the consumer and the driver?
Good morning. Well, the expanded ULEZ will be terrible for a huge number of people and won't make any difference to the air at all, which is one of the reasons why I've been fighting it every step of the way. We know this because the Mayor, as part of his consultation, had to get an independent company to produce a report assessing the impact that it would have, and it came back and said that across the board it would have a minor to negligible impact on air quality in Outer London. So it's not really about air quality, it's about money grabbing.
And money grabbing in some order, Gareth, because in 18 months they've raked in £400 million in fines from motorists who've not paid on time or strayed into the low emission zone without realising, and that's before it's expanded to every single borough in London.
Yes. That's completely correct. So that's the ultra-low emission zone as it currently is constituted, which goes out to the North and South Circular. But what the Mayor is proposing to do is to take it right out to the Greater London boundary. Now, that will hit not just people that live in Greater London, it will also hit people that have to come into Greater London from outside. So, for example, if you live in Dartford, but you work in Sidcup, you'll drive across the Dartford Bridge potentially on a daily basis, and you'll get hit by that every time. And London's border is not always apparent either. So people could stray into it by accident, not realise that they've gone into the ultra-low emission zone, and the first they'll find out about it is when they get a £180 fine come through the letterbox. And so it's...
No, so I was going to say, the thing is, Gareth, the trouble is that a lot of people won't be able to afford to replace their car to conform to the emission standards that ULEZ demands.
That's exactly right. I mean, I've had letters from thousands of people now over the last sort of 6 months or so. Some of them are coming from elderly people who are telling me that they are now going to be effectively housebound because their car was the only way they could get out and meet people. Now, my constituency is very rural. It's right on the edge of London. You can go to parts of it, and I've done videos, and people can look at them on my social media feed, of where I'm in, for example, Cudham Village, which is literally a Kent country village with hedgerows, farmers' fields, village pubs, village cricket, etc. And these are areas that are going to get hit by this. And you think, well, this is preposterous. I mean, there are fields with herds of deer in them where I'm describing. What there isn't is a lot of public transport alternatives. So people need to be able to drive around in their cars. So I've got single traders telling me they'll have to stop working either in Greater London or give up altogether. Social care workers who need their cars, they tend to be lower paid people. They can't get around to see their clients anymore. My local higher education college has told me that lots of their staff are not going to be able to cope with this. It really is going to have a shattering impact. And as I said right at the beginning, it's not actually going to improve the air, so there is no need for it at all.
Gareth, what might the implications be of the result of this judicial review this morning? Just explain to our viewers and our listeners what the implications of that could be.
It depends what the court finds. So it's a judicial review. So it's not about whether the policy is a good policy or not. It's about whether the Mayor followed the right processes in arriving at his decision. And there are multiple grounds that the 5 councils put in against that. And the court is going to hear 3 of them. One is that he failed to follow statutory processes. Another is that he did an unlawful consultation, and finally that he inadequately consulted on the scrappage scheme, which he has offered, which I have to say is a derisory scrappage scheme anyway, but it wasn't, the impact on people outside London I don't think was properly considered, and I think that's the ground that the court is going to hear. So the court has a range of sanctions available to it. They could order him to reconsult, they could order him to stop it altogether, they could order him to delay, or they could find in his favour, in which case the path will be clear for him to proceed on the 29th of August.
And just to remind people, Gareth, you already have to pay the congestion charge if you go into central London. You're now going to have to pay the ultra-low emission zone, £12.50 on top. So that's going to be nearly £30 to drive into London.
That's true, but only if you have a non-compliant vehicle.
Yeah.
So the age range is for a petrol car, I think, is if anything older than 2006 as a registration, that's likely to be non-compliant. And with a diesel, I think it's anything older than 2015 would be non-compliant. There are some exceptions to that, but not very many. So yes, it's going to make driving prohibitively expensive for quite a large number of people.
It's also not entirely environmentally friendly either to be scrapping cars, which are perfectly good. I live in a ULEZ zone in West London. Good friend of mine, she's got a slightly old diesel car, but she wasn't happy. She wasn't ready to sell it. She was quite happy to use it for a few more years and get a few more miles on the clock. But now she can't even leave the house to go to our weekly netball match because it costs her 13 quid. I mean,
exactly, and that's exactly. I mean, I've got so many examples like this of where people are going to be really badly hit by this. And of course, the other thing as well is that while the limits are what I've just described to you in terms of the age of the vehicles, there's nothing to stop the mayor, once the ULEZ is installed, from deciding to raise that and say...
Yeah.
Right. I think we've lost him. That was Gareth Bacon, Conservative MP for Orpington and a former member of the London Assembly. We will keep you up to date with what's happening in that court case today. And best of luck to those 5 councils. Got in the studio with us Nigel Nelson, political commentator, and Tonya is with us, of course. And Nigel, you're going to defend this horrible tax, aren't you?
Well, the ULEZ tax, I don't defend the practicalities of it. So I think in principle, the idea of clean air, if we want to get to net zero in 2050, if you believe in that, then you need that. I don't like the idea of it being extended outside in central London, because I think it causes too many problems. I'd also like to see the money not just go into a central fund, but actually used for a proper purpose.
It's a stealth tax.
Well, I think it is a stealth tax, and that's the problem with it. That's what I mean about the money ought to be earmarked for something that we can see, rather than just simply go into Sadiq Khan's coffers.
Well, if I wasn't here this morning, I would be outside that court now.
Campaigning?
Campaigning, holding the No ULEZ. I was at the meeting last Wednesday with politicians and other campaigners against this, because this is... It's literally killing people. So they're saying that the bad air is killing people. It's not. This is literally killing people's business. It's putting them through stress. It's the most ridiculous stealth tax. And for clean air, that's not been proved. I mean, if Sadiq Khan actually gave a damn about clean air, wouldn't he be fixing the air in the underground, which I get every day? Because I don't actually have a car. You know, my family have cars, but I don't have a car. I get it in every day, and it's 16 to 30 times worse than a busy traffic road. So if he really gave a damn about clean air, that's one thing that he could actually fix. But it would cost him money, not taking money out of our pockets. And can I just add what you said about old people? My father popped over from Cyprus, where he lives, and he borrowed one of my brother's cars. My brother forgot to tell him not to cross over certain places. So he was going to see some of his old friends and crossing over the North Circular or something. He ended up getting a bill of something, it was something like £700, which just took the wind out of him. He was so upset. You
mean because then he hadn't seen the ticket?
He hadn't understand. He hadn't seen it. By the time the tickets came through, my brother said, look, I've got this. So we all kind of chipped in, we paid it. But he was so distressed by this. So distressed. It's completely wrong, and this has to stop. The courts, I mean, they might be doing it because of the way that the mayor put things forward, but the reality is, this whole ULEZ thing. I mean, I'm against ULEZ completely, not just the expansion. I'm against it completely.
And Nigel, that's the point Tonya's made. You know, people are going to drive into the ULEZ zone and not realise.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is what part of the court case is about, because if you are, you're going to get a situation where one side of a street might be in a ULEZ zone and the other one isn't, and if you want to go to the other side of the street, you suddenly get charged. I mean, there's a whole host of things there. The local authorities surrounding London are doing things like they won't put the cameras up on their land, that kind of thing. But I mean, the principle has got to be right if you actually believe in having clean air.
The thing is, I suppose...
But Tonya made the point that science hasn't been proven on this.
Well...
No, I mean, even Gareth Bacon was saying then, even Sadiq Khan's own research proved that these areas hadn't had the air quality improved where they'd introduced.
It's fairy stories. It's fairy stories to make money. I mean, I know Sadiq sees me as some kind of termagant in the sense that I'm very, very belligerent when it comes to this. He is wrong on this. And this whole push for net zero, for clean air, it's not been proved, but it's taxing us at a time that people cannot afford to be taxed.
I can see all sorts of reasons why you would want to get people out of their cars. cycling is good for our health
Yeah.
and we're all too fat and unfit. I get that. Just the noise and the busyness and children coming out of schools. And I'd quite like to see fewer cars on the road. Of course, in principle, I agree with you. But do that with an incentive to use alternative forms of transport. Give us clean, safe, on-time buses. Give us an excellent tube system. Give us, you know, excellent... I mean, even I don't even mind
they could develop the river more. I mean,
use
why not use the River Thames? One of the
all
great
these things
assets.
are fine. I mean, I agree with all that. Do all that. It is just that we shouldn't oppose an environmental measure because it's inconvenient or expensive. We'll all have to pay for net zero if we believe in that.
Well, I don't believe in net zero by 2030.
That's a different argument.
I would have net zero at 2050.
Yes, most of the public don't. And also the science...
Well, it is 2050.
No, I mean, sorry, I put 30 years on top of it.
Well, but not sure the planet will be here then.
And these cars shouldn't... These cars...
Of course it will. The planet will be here then, Nigel. What, in 2080? Well, apparently we were all going to die from the ozone layer, if you remember, in the 1990s.
Yeah.
We all stopped using hairspray because the ozone layer was...
That's part of it too. I mean, there's still holes up there of that.
And the whole of the Labour Party is backing this proposal. The whole of the Labour Party. And the whole of the Tory party is opposing it. And actually, it could be... if this goes through, it could be a vote winner for the Tories, particularly in those outer London seats.
Well, I mean, I don't think that combating climate change is a great electoral position to stand on.
Because we don't accept that it's going to combat climate change.
Well, the
the £12.50 tax on a car is going to solve climate change.
It's absolutely not. It's just making money for the mayor's
Oh, that's it then. Did you know it's going to be that simple?
It's like Bev's hairspray. If you don't use
and that solves climate change.
Use the hairspray that was going to, you know, put a hole in the ozone layer, you are helping to tackle climate change.
Yeah, but I carried on using hairspray, and we fixed the hole in the ozone.
Exactly.
I don't think it made that much difference. But talking of the planet, let's discuss this story. This is Just Stop Oil, and the Prime Minister has said, Tonya, hasn't he, that Just Stop Oil yobs should be treated in the way that Johnny Bairstow did on the cricket pitch.
Absolutely. And
let's 3 cheers for Rishi Sunak.
Finally, well, I'm not allowed to say what I wanted to say.
You know what you mean?
Corona, but pair. In the sense that this is the way that they should be treated. They are breaking the law. They are causing damage, and they are breaking the law. I am so for protests. You know, I was on all the anti-lockdown protests. I believe in protests, legal, peaceful protests that don't damage buildings and cause chaos and stop ambulances from getting where they need to go. So finally, he's spoken up. This is going to get him some votes. Finally, going to get him some votes.
I don't watch cricket, but the roar of the crowd when Bairstow picked that protester up was extraordinary.
Yeah, you can understand why he's doing it. What surprises me from this is a Prime Minister should actually say that somebody should take the law into their own hands. The recommendation must be that, yes, the police should crack down on Just Stop Oil. Yes, they should get them off the roads if they're slow walking and shove them onto the pavement. All that goes without saying.
The police can't be there all the time.
No,
these wretched people are doing these protests.
But, well, the police should be there when the protest happens. But the point is, you can't have somebody... This was very funny. It was all very peaceful. Everyone's on the side of the wicket keeper. He did a great job, except that he was taking the law into his own hands. And that's dangerous.
I'm very pleased he did.
As citizens, we are allowed to take the law in our own hand. If it is for a correct reason, we can do a citizen's arrest, and that's what he did there. He took that guy and he got him out of there. We are, as citizens, we do have the right to do that.
I see what you mean, though. What you're saying is, so next time that Just Stop Oil happens and White Van Man gets out and he wrestles one of these protesters to the ground and takes him off, and then he gets arrested, he'll say, well, Rishi Sunak said I was allowed to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
But the horror...
The police should be doing it.
But the horror when we saw that guy get out of his van, bundle those dreadful people off the street, and the police put the van driver in handcuffs.
Well,
it was an outrage.
because he was committing an assault.
It was an outrage.
And that's my point about the public should not intervene because that's what they risk.
The Just Stop Oil protesters were breaking the law by blocking a highway.
Yes, they were, but then he committed an offence by having a go at them. And this is my point, that you've got to leave this job to the police.
They're not
doing it, though, are they?
When they were vicious with that. That guy that came out of the van to get rid of the protesters, they were so violent and heavy-handed with him. And so I don't know if that makes me not trust the police. I must admit, it's not right.
This is a vote winner.
It is.
It's a vote winner.
What vigilante sort of...
It's a vote winner. It's a vote winner.
I'm with
More
you.
of it, please, Prime Minister.
Can we just briefly touch on, before we go, Tonya, the supermarkets ripping off the motorists with petrol prices that's been exposed today?
So they should be greatly fined, and that should be given back to the consumer, or that should be in some kind of fine that goes back into the government that helps people with their bills and with their petrol and all bills. It's completely obscene. It's disgusting. We used to go to the supermarket because they would offer us cheaper rates for petrol. We used to queue up in the supermarkets to put our petrol then. And then they got onto this monopoly, which it is. It's a complete monopoly, and they must be fined so heavily for it that they're not tempted to do it again.
It's a very good point Tonya makes, actually, because they'd bought our trust over the years. We trusted the supermarkets on fuel, and we feel all very deceived by this, Nigel.
Yes, and the answer is, I'm in favour of the free market, but you must control it.
Yeah.
And the question is getting the balance right. The Competition and Markets Authority have powers, as Tonya says, to fine and so on. I think they should be setting no minimum price on petrol, but they should be able to set a maximum price and have powers to do that.
And we shouldn't forget these supermarkets have driven 4,000 independent garages out of business.
Exactly,
We're going to be carrying on this, and we're going to be talking to you two again in just a little while, and we're also going to be talking about the petrol situation with our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis. See you in a minute.
Hi there, Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers once again for many of us today. Prolonged rain for some, especially towards the south, but sunny spells in between a few of the showers. We've got low pressure still in control of our weather. Low pressure sitting to the north of the UK. Another low developing to the south, along with a frontal system likely to push up some heavy and prolonged rain through the course of the day for southern counties, and certainly some lively showers about early afternoon before that prolonged rain sets in across the southwest and then into the south of England, but perhaps affecting South Wales as well later on. Otherwise, for the Midlands, North Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, it's a mix of bright spells and showers. Some of the showers will be heavy, odd rumble of thunder, and it's going to feel cool with temperatures generally 17 to 20 Celsius, although somewhere like the East Midlands, East Anglia, before the rain sets in, could reach 21 or 22 Celsius. But it is good to turn wetter across the south and southeast into East Anglia through the evening. That rain slow to clear during the early hours of Wednesday. A gusty wind through the Channel and towards the southeast of England as well. Elsewhere, the showers fading, but still one or two around for eastern Scotland, northwest England, parts of Wales, and temperatures at around 8 to 12 Celsius as we start off Wednesday. But Wednesday begins once again with showers from the word go, especially for Scotland, Northern Ireland, into central and western parts of the UK. And then those showers, well, fairly widely into the afternoon. A scattering of these downpours, but they'll move through fairly quickly on a breeze from the west, interspersed by sunny spells. And it's a bit warmer on Wednesday, 22 or 23 Celsius possible in some of the warmer spots. Wednesday evening brings further showers for many, especially towards the north and the west, but increasingly through Thursday and Friday, the showers will be confined to the northwest, and we're going to see plenty of sunshine elsewhere. And what we'll also notice is a sharp upturn in temperatures, 30 Celsius or more in the southeast later.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 11 o'clock on Tuesday, the 4th of July, American Independence Day, of course. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So supermarkets are facing accusations of petrol profiteering, and the watchdog has summoned the banks to find out why saving rates aren't rising quicker. Rip off Britain.
Yeah. Elsewhere, in Sadiq Khan's ultra-low emissions scheme is being challenged by 5 Conservative councils in the courts today because we all know it's going to harm local businesses during the cost of living crisis.
And as we increasingly face a cashless society, GB News launches our first ever campaign, Don't Kill Cash. The People's Channel is fighting to save the pound in your pocket and stop financial exclusion.
And we're heading back to Scotland this morning as the King continues with his first Holyrood week in Edinburgh since he became the monarch.
We're going to have Tanya and Nigel back in the studio as well for some debates, but let us know your thoughts. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. Here, though, is your news with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good morning to you. It's 11:15. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. The average rate for a 5-year fixed-rate mortgage has now moved above 6%. The Financial Information Service, Moneyfacts, says the average 2-year fix has gone up to 6.47%. It comes as the UK's 4 major banks have been summoned to a meeting with the financial watchdog over allegations of profiteering. The FCA will question the bosses of HSBC, NatWest, Lloyds and Barclays over concerns saving rates are lagging behind the soaring costs of mortgages. The average easy access savings rate is 2.45%. Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, says there's no financial economic stability.
It's very concerning, and it's like rolling financial thunder, this. The rates are going up and up, particularly over the past month or so, and every month there's about 200,000 more people coming off a 2 or a 5-year fixed rate. It might have been fixed in the past at something like 2%. And they're now coming on to the kind of rates that you've just quoted. It's going to cost families hundreds of pounds a month when they renew these deals.
Energy companies will face penalties if they prioritise investors over customers. Ofgem says suppliers should focus on maintaining financial resilience rather than paying out dividends to shareholders, and it will take action if pricing rules are abused. It comes as wholesale prices have begun to ease and domestic companies are expected to return to profit after 5 years of losses. But the former boss of Energy UK, Angela Knight, says it's not just the suppliers' fault.
I think regulators generally, though, have been a little bit asleep at the wheel, whether it's water, whether it's energy. And I think that financial regulation is these days extremely complicated. And what they can do on the one hand, which is say to banks, you've got to hold more capital, on the other, makes it harder for them to put up the savings rates. But regulators do have a part to play. And I don't think that they have stood in properly over not just this last year, but over several years.
Education union leaders are calling on the government to release the pay recommendations made by an independent body. National Education Union members in England are staging fresh strikes on Wednesday and Friday this week over the ongoing pay dispute. Now, all 4 education unions rejected the government's latest offer of £1,000 plus a 4.5% pay rise. In May, the Sunday Times reported the review body recommended a 6.5% pay rise for teachers. The government has yet to formally publish the recommendation. A helpline's been launched for homeless veterans in England, Scotland and Wales. The government-funded initiative aims to connect ex-servicemen and women with housing providers, charities and local authorities. Over £8.5 million has been invested into the service and the website in an effort to end veterans sleeping rough. The Home Secretary will meet senior sporting figures and police leaders to address concerns about disruptive protests at summer events. Suella Braverman and Sports Secretary Lucy Fraser aim to find solutions to counter demonstrations from groups like Just Stop Oil and Animal Rising. It's after events including the rugby final at Twickenham, the Ashes over the weekend and World Snooker Championship have been affected in recent months. The Foreign Secretary says the UK won't tolerate China's attempt to intimidate 8 overseas activists. Police in Hong Kong have issued arrest warrants, claiming the activists are encouraging sanctions against China and they're aiming to undermine the region's stability. Well, James Cleverly says it's a further example of the authoritarian reach of China's extraterrestrial laws. Universities will announce plans to incorporate AI into their curriculum and assessments. The Russell Group has published a set of principles. It's aimed to help universities support the ethical and responsible use of AI tools. The Vice-Chancellors for 24 Russell Group universities, including Oxford, Cambridge and Bristol, say they hope to help students with real-world applications of the new technology. And the last surviving member of the French commando unit that landed on the Normandy beaches during the D-Day invasion has died at the age of 100. Leon Gaultier played a vital role in the liberation of France from German occupation in 1944. President Emmanuel Macron has paid tribute to Gaultier and his comrades, acknowledging them as heroes of the liberation and vowing their memory will be preserved. And Meta platforms, that's also known as Facebook, they're gearing up to launch Threads. That's a microblogging app that resembles Twitter. It comes in response to Twitter's recent announcement of restricting post access. Threads, which is Instagram's text-based conversation app, is expected to be released on Thursday. Users will have the ability to follow the same accounts they follow on Instagram and also to keep their current username. So that is the latest battle between Elon Musk and the owner of Facebook. This is GB News. More as it happens now. It's back to Bev and Andrew.
Well, to our top story this morning, the government has accused supermarkets of treating customers like cash cows after the Competitions and Market Authority found drivers are being charged an extra 6p per litre.
It's not just supermarkets. Britain's banks have been summoned to meet the financial watchdog this Thursday to tackle accusations of profiteering.
Well, joining us for more now is GB News East Midlands reporter Will Hollis. Good morning, Will. You're at a petrol station. What are they thinking there about these supermarkets ripping us off?
Good morning. Well, it's one of those inevitabilities, isn't it? We can all complain about petrol prices. We can always reflect on how expensive they seem to be, but we all still need to fill up our cars. And this particular petrol station here in Asda, it's one of those where there's actually nobody inside a shop. You just go up to the pump and tap your card and it will pay for however much fuel you need, and then you drive off. This is just one of the supermarkets that has been investigated by the Competition Market Authorities for allegedly not passing on savings that they're making and increasing profit margins. The CMA in their inquiry found that Tesco, Sainsbury's, Morrison's and Asda were not passing on some of those savings. They said that between 2019 and 2022, they raised around £1 billion extra from drivers that were choosing to pay for petrol at supermarkets. It was around 900 million actually, and that meant that it was a profit of about 6p compared to before that period on a litre that drivers were paying for petrol. Now, what this might mean for the future is that the government is saying that maybe having some sort of price comparison where fuel providers at supermarkets are forced to put out the price that they're charging for fuel at their particular forecourt. And this is one thing that actually already happens. That's the criticism of this government plan. You can already check on websites to see where the cheapest fuel that you can find nearby you might be, but the ministers are saying by forcing supermarkets to take part in this practice, it might make competition a little bit more fierce at a time when supermarkets are being accused of using drivers, using the shoppers that choose to shop at their supermarket as cash cows to raise funds back that they lost during the pandemic.
OK, thank you very much, Will. Will Hollis there at Asda. And also...
A cashless... And that fits in with our campaign at GB News. We want to stop this move towards a cashless Britain. Sign that petition. It's on our GB News website.
Not just a cashless garage, but a personless garage. So if you call what Will said there, you rock up in your car, you tap your card on the machine, you get your petrol and you drive off. You don't even get to say hello to someone behind the counter.
And they've put out of business, the supermarkets, effectively, 4,000 independent garages, of which your family used to run.
We were one of them. Right now, joining us for more on this is Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight, lucky him, Bob Seeley. Good morning, Bob. Thank you very much. Morning. Thank you for joining us. What do you make of this? We've been taken advantage of, haven't we, the British people? But it looks like the government are trying to do something to help now.
For sure, the government are trying to do something, and well done, Rishi, well done, Jeremy, for doing so. But the basic principle here is that we know socialism's a disaster and doesn't work, but we need to make capitalism work better. And we can't allow these big firms, especially if they're owned by these investment vehicles who are desperate to recoup the cost, because sometimes when they take over big outfits like Asda, you know, they do so on lots and lots of debt. And they're clearly trying to recoup the money to pay that debt or to pay off chunks of it by overcharging in other areas. And if they're not overcharging on food, they're trying to overcharge on petrol. So we need tougher regulators to make sure that these big firms treat, frankly, viewers of GB News better than they do.
Have they been asleep on the job, in your view, Bob, the regulators?
Yes, I think the simple answer is yes. And look, I'll give you a perfect example of a former monopoly that doesn't even have a regulator, and that's Whitelink, one of the ferry firms on the Isle of Wight. And these investment vehicles, these hedge funds, these investment funds, they take over former regulated outfits, or sometimes, you know, Boots or, you know, Asda or these big firms, and they load up debt on them. And they've loaded up debt on the Isle of Wight ferry. And sadly, my constituents, every time we use Whitelink, are paying for those very large levels of debt. So these firms have complex structures, very often in Luxembourg or Guernsey or places like that. They pay very, very little, or they make very little profit, but they are loaded up with debt. And I think it's wrong. And I'm going to try to this winter bring in a bill that's going to look at these regulators, or look at these former monopolies to see if we can get them regulated better. Clearly, that's not quite the same with supermarkets, but with some of them, the same principle is there, that these companies are loaded up with debt that we, as ordinary folks, are then asked to pay for. And I think that's wrong. And the fuel price sting is in part an example of that.
Can I say on regulators? I thought a really interesting figure, because we were talking last week, weren't we, about the Thames Water and the water companies, how much they're charging us. 2/3 of staff from the regulator have gone to work for these water companies, including the interim chief executive of Thames Water, which is really in the dock at the moment for the way it's been polluting our rivers. How is the revolving door is going too quickly? There should be a period between, shouldn't there?
Yes, and look, it's got better. I think Labour, under the last Labour government, it's a long time ago now, but I think the water companies paid 32 billion in dividends. Since under the Conservatives, it's not quite half that, but it's about 20 billion in dividends. So they're still paying a lot, but we are now forcing them to invest more. And it's worthwhile saying that, look, if there was proper regulation, these companies would have worked better than they do. When the firms were in national ownership, they were investing about £500 million a year. Under our new plans, they're going to be investing £4 billion a year. So we're quadrupling the amount of money that the water firms are having to put in and having to invest. But you're right, over the last 20, 25 years, the regulators have probably had way too light a touch and have been allowing them to get away with too big a dividends and not enough investment. That investment is increasing, has increased since nationalisation or since privatisation, and is going to increase again. But actually, we need tougher regulation. There's this really stale debate in this country, Andrew, that you see in politics, that if something doesn't work properly, it sort of, the left say it's an argument for socialism. It's not actually. It's an argument for getting capitalism right. It's an argument for making sure that capitalism works for everybody and not just the rich. And it's an argument for making sure the regulators remember that they are here to act on behalf of all of us to make sure these big firms, yes, get the investment from the private sector, go out on the money markets, get good management in, pay them accordingly, but make sure that they answer to us. And they're not doing that at the moment. And we need to be taking responsibility and make sure they do.
Bob Seeley MP, would you like to give your backing to the GB News campaign, Don't Kill Cash? You live on the Isle of Wight. You know what the Isle of Wight has? Arcade machines, ice cream vans, fish and chip shops, hire deck chair. We need cash, don't we?
Bev, I was actually going to mention that to you, but I forgot. Yes, because on the island it's really important. And I actually met with one of the ATM companies a couple of weeks ago now to talk about why they're now beginning to the hole-in-the-wall cash machines are now having to begin to charge on the Isle of Wight. And I said, look, that's really bad. And he said it's because we're not getting the appropriate rates off the banks. So yet again, you have these big firms, in this case the banks, that are shutting down branches all over the Isle of Wight and all over Britain. And who's taking up the slack? It's the ATM machines to get cash out sometimes, but they're now having to charge because the banks aren't giving them a fair cut. But also, more importantly, it's the postmasters and mistresses. And some of my postmasters and mistresses are struggling because they're having to do the bank's job. And a lot of folks on the island, Bev, as you very rightly point out, still rely on cash. And we probably have a larger cash economy than some other parts of Britain and maybe places like London where people tend to be more cashless. But no, for sure, sign me up.
How do you think Rishi Sunak...
Are you going to come down to the Isle of Wight, you two?
I would love to. You know I love the Isle of Wight. A lot of my childhood holidays there. What do you think Rishi Sunak will think about our campaign to keep cash? He's going to be quite annoyed at us, isn't he?
No, I don't think so. I'll do what I can to ask him, actually.
Please
Next
do.
time I see him. Yeah, no, I'll get him signed up. I'll see if I can sign him up.
But he's fully signed up to the technocratic age of a digital central banking currency at the very least. This is going to be a thorn in his side, isn't it?
Well, maybe, but look, OK, I actually try not to carry cash because I use this and my sort of credit cards at the back to try to pay for stuff. So I'm very happy to live without cash, but I'm hugely respectful of the fact that a lot of people on the island don't, and a lot of people around the UK, especially older folks, don't. So we need to think of them a bit more. And if that means that we have cash for another 10, 20, 30 years, then all well and good. And if that time slowly, people are used to and become happy with a cashless society, that's great. But we need that cash. And for folks on the island, it is important. So I'm very supportive.
Can we ask you just finally, Bob, today it's 6 months since Rishi Sunak announced those 5 pledges, those promises that he would deliver. You know what they are: stop the boats and halving inflation. So far, none of the 5 have been reached and don't look like they're going to be reached anytime soon. Are you worried if he doesn't hit those targets, that's going to be politically very difficult for the Conservatives?
It'll be politically difficult, but we're going to try to hit those targets. And I think we gave, if I remember correctly, Andrew, we gave ourselves until the first half of next year to reach them. Yeah. So if inflation is stickier, we're still going to try to get it down. But look, people are going to have a simple choice, as you know, at the next election: a Labour Party that's desperate to spend more and a Conservative Party that's trying to get spending and taxes down. When the Labour Party criticise us and say taxes have gone up too much, Look, people like me say absolutely, but then what's their answer? Oh, we're not really bothered. We're going to put them up more. That is not a serious answer. Same with immigration. We know that immigration is too high. Labour are right to point it out, but then the Labour response, oh, we don't care, it's going to go up even further with us, is absolutely absurd. So we know that we need to get this stuff right, but we also know there's going to be a clear choice in a year or two. Who do you trust? You know, and it's going to be Rishi, who is sticking to a plan, has got leadership, charisma and dynamism, and Keir Starmer, who, Andrew, as you know, is literally ditching every single policy that he's announced in the last few months.
Yeah, U-turn Starmer. Great, thanks for joining us. So that's Bob Seeley, he's the Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight, backing our campaign to preserve cash. Now, still to come, King Charles. He's up in Scotland. He's viewing the Jubilee gates marking the Platinum Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II. It's at the entrance to Abbey Yard at the Palace of Holyrood House. That's in Edinburgh. We'll bring you all of that on Britain's Newsroom.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
And it's 11:22. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, and you're getting in touch in your droves.
Yeah, talking about the ULEZ judicial review. Sadiq Khan is in court effectively this morning to justify this. Malcolm says if Khan truly believed that emissions were killing children, he would ban all cars from London. That would at least be principled. Instead, he's saying, pay me £12.50 and you can kill as many children as you like. Now, he would say, well, that these are less polluting cars. That's the logic.
Well, that's what his view is. But Alex says this is not just happening in London. That's a very good point, Alex. I'm not now able to trade in Glasgow because of this tax. It makes for unfair competition. I can't quote for work because of these charges. I can't compete with inner-city companies or afford a new van. That's the point. It costs a lot of money to replace your white van.
It really does.
And one of the boroughs that's most affected by this in London is Barking Dagenham, which is traditional working-class area, classic Labour Party territory, and they're going to be massacred by this tax.
And the thing is, you're being encouraged to buy electric cars rather than your polluting cars. And the electric cars are lasting 5 minutes and ending up on the scrap heap. It's just, there's no logic in terms of saving the planet.
And where do you charge them?
Don't. Like I've said before, I spend most of my day looking for my mobile phone charger. I'm not going to drive around looking for a charger for my car. Ronnie says, I just don't get it. Sadiq Khan is a moron. He's extremely unpopular. Just tell us what you really think, Ronnie. He's extremely unpopular as the Mayor of London, so why can't he be removed from office now? Well, we live in a democracy, it don't really work like that. The man is so far removed from the ordinary citizens of London in terms of his agenda. Dead right, Ronnie, I couldn't agree.
Well, I'll tell you why he won't be removed from office, Ronnie, because the Tories have made a complete hash of their mayoral contest. Remember, they lost the front-runner last week because he'd allegedly groped a woman in Downing Street 10 years earlier, and I'm afraid the other two candidates...
Well, they are quite something, aren't they? But
if ever they needed a big Boris Johnson figure, it was for next April or May, because I think the mayor is very vulnerable.
Susan Hall and Moss Hussein are the two Tory candidates that they've narrowed it down to.
Those well-known household names.
Can we talk to Catherine Forster about that before we talk about water?
I think we should.
Can we talk to you about the London mayor? I know I've just sprung that on you.
Isn't it interesting that, you know, there were other candidates who wanted to be on the list, Paul Scully, Minister for London, being one of them.
Yeah.
And they have refused to reopen it. And as you say, I think most people have never heard of...
Moss Hussein and Susan Hall.
Exactly.
Front page,
you
know, faces.
And so there's a choice of two. They don't appear to be massively inspiring at this point. And you have to wonder if the Conservatives have sort of given up.
Well,
they have given up.
They feel like it. They really do, because this is the biggest city in the country. In the outer boroughs, it's normally very strongly Conservative. The ultra-low emission zone expansion is a gift for the Conservatives because they're implacably opposed to it.
There they are.
It's £12.50 on top of your congestion charge. Every Labour MP supports it, every Labour councillor supports it, and they've got two candidates nobody's ever heard of.
Yeah, I was talking to... Sorry, Catherine, I mean, you were there last night as well at the House of Commons. I was talking to one Conservative MP who was saying that Moss specifically has been chosen because there is so much ethnic diversity in London. He's a Bangladeshi-born boy, lived in a mud hut, apparently.
He did, with a tin roof.
Yeah, and he's now a KC. He's certainly a success story of social mobility, there's no doubt about it. But is he going to cut through with the voters? I find that hard to believe.
Yes. And of course, we're going to hear a lot more about them, aren't we, over the next couple of weeks, because I think the announcement's on the 19th of July.
They're voting now, the Tory party members, who they choose.
Seem like a missed opportunity.
Really it is, because, honestly, he is so vulnerable. People are fed up to the back teeth. And we've had him for nearly 8 years already. Why do we want him for a third term? We don't.
And ULEZ, as you say, is a huge thing.
Issue.
I've been in Uxbridge recently a few times. Of course, that's at the far end. And it's really toxic because, of course, it's not going to hit the people that have the money to get the latest.
Exactly.
It is going to hit the tradespeople, the people who are running an old banger that will have to get rid of it, that don't necessarily have 8,000, 9,000 lying around to buy another vehicle.
And Catherine, two you might think would support it. The Unite Trade Union and GMB both opposing it because so many of their members, particularly who work at Heathrow Airport, for instance, will be driving older cars they can't replace and they can't afford to pay the £12.50 a day.
Yeah,
Incredible.
I mean, like Uxbridge, I know it's at the end of the tube line, but it's totally outside of London. You drive through fields to get there.
Yeah.
So it's...
And they've raked in over £400 million in fines in the last 18 months already. It's a stealth tax. He should just be honest about it, the mayor, instead of saying, it's to save lives.
honestly.
It's all about the environment.
By the way, if you want to watch sit-down interviews with both of those mayoral candidates, Dan Wootton did them on his show, so you can find them on the GB News app, you can find them on the GB News website. I particularly recommend watching the one with Moz Hussein because he's...
Oh, you're going to be finding it really inspiring.
Dan did a brilliant job. And actually, Susan Hall, quite like her. I think we need a bit of a matriarch. And we need some more strong women in
we've never
politics.
had a woman mayor of London.
No.
We've had 3 blokes.
Yeah, and she's a big fan of GB News.
She is.
So we like her. Should we talk about Thames Water?
Yeah.
Go on.
So this afternoon, there's a House of Lords committee will be grilling the water regulators Ofwat.
Who've been hopeless.
I think the line will pretty much be, what have you been doing?
Yeah.
Because on their watch, and they are supposed to keep an eye on what the water companies are doing and make sure that they are fulfilling their commitments. But as we now know, with the near collapse of Thames Water last week, £14 billion of debt. Collectively, the water companies have racked up, I think, £60 billion of debt, while paying out £51 billion to their shareholders. And I know Margaret Thatcher privatised lots of things, but when she did water in 1989, no other country followed suit. We're the only country that water is wholly privatised. And 70% is owned by foreign companies. So to give you an example, Anglian Water, who are the 3rd most polluting, they're owned largely by Canadian pension companies.
Terrible.
Abu Dhabi investment
So they don't
funds.
care about people here.
They don't
about
care.
Quality of water.
I was down in Portsmouth for Camilla Tominey's show a few weeks ago. They were talking about sewage. And a guy there who was very angry, he'd been a local councillor for 30 years, he said, you know, they've been promising this investment. He said, oh, you don't swim in South Sea, you just go through the motions.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. Gross. And, you know, people are very angry. And we've had a very wet spring, and now there's some hosepipe bans coming in because pipes are not being fixed. So people will be wondering, and it's not like, OK, if you're not happy with your energy supplier, I can go to Scottish Power or whatever. But if you're one of Thames Water's 15 million customers, you're stuck. It's a total monopoly. You can't go elsewhere.
No, exactly. It's not a proper privatisation because there is no competition. And I hope the MPs are going to say to the regulators this afternoon, aren't you too close to these water companies? Because the chief executive of Thames Water left in a hurry because of the scandal over the £14 billion of debt to be replaced by a woman called Catherine Ross as interim chief executive. She used to be the head of Ofwat, the regulator. Hang on, how did that happen?
Exactly. It's a revolving door. There was a story the other day said that 27 ex-Ofwat people are now working for the water companies. Now, obviously, the water companies pay very well. They've been handing out big bonuses despite the failure, really, to invest. And people at Ofwat, you know, they're not paid very much. So it does raise questions about definite potential conflict of interest.
You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours in a few years' time.
And even Nick Timothy, Theresa May's former chief of staff, was writing in the Telegraph today about capitalism and how, sure, you know, it's the best model we have, but when it is untrammelled and unregulated and these companies behave very badly...
That was the point Bob Seeley, the Conservative MP, was making us here. Capitalism is a much better system than socialism, but you've got to make it work properly for the people.
Yeah, and in fact, in the papers today, we had Sir Steve Redgrave on the show last week, didn't we, during Henley Regatta, and in the papers today they're saying that they found record levels of E. coli in the Thames during the regatta, and this is the same story.
Gross.
The fact that the water companies are not
you
doing the job
wouldn't
that
want
they
to
should
fall
be
in
doing.
the River Thames anytime soon.
I like
I know
swimming in
people
it.
that row on the Thames that have fallen in and been really quite unwell. But meanwhile, our water bills are going to go up 40% by 2030, so
it should be quite a lively exchanges this afternoon if the MPs do their job.
Yeah, I think it will be.
I think so. It'll be interesting to see what comes of that.
What going to do now?
Yeah. You know, a lot of fun. Right, thank you, Catherine. Right, still to come on the show this morning, cut immigration or lose the general election. A new Tory group tells Rishi Sunak.
We're going to be speaking, of course, also tonight to Nelson and Tonya Buckton on their thoughts on this controversial topic. That's after news. Nigel Nelson won't agree, of course. Never does.
Hi there, it is 11:31. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. The average rate for a 5-year fixed-rate mortgage has now moved above 6% for the first time this year. The financial information service Money Facts says the average two-year fix has gone up to almost 6.5%. Now, it comes as the UK's four major banks have been summoned to a meeting with the financial watchdog over allegations of profiteering. The FCA will question bosses from HSBC, Lloyds, NatWest and Barclays over low levels of interest on savings, which are lagging behind the cost of mortgages. The average easy access savings rate is 2.43%. Energy companies have been warned they could face penalties if they prioritise investors over customers. Ofgem says suppliers should retain profits to protect consumers rather than paying out dividends to shareholders. And they've said action will be taken if pricing rules are abused. Wholesale energy prices have begun to ease, so domestic suppliers should be returning to profit. China's urged the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, to stop interfering after he vowed to defend pro-democracy activists targeted by Hong Kong with arrest warrants. James Cleverly says the UK won't tolerate China's attempt to intimidate the 8 overseas activists. The arrest warrants have been issued by police in Hong Kong, claiming the activists are encouraging sanctions on China and are trying to undermine the region's stability. And the last surviving member of the French commando unit that landed on the Normandy beaches during the D-Day invasion has died at the age of 100. Leon Gaultier played a vital role in the liberation of France from German occupation in 1944. President Emmanuel Macron says Gaultier and his comrades were heroes of the liberation and their memory will be preserved. That's it for the moment. More on all of our stories on our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
A quick look at the day's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2704 and €1.1655. The price of gold, £1,519.81 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,545 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
.38 with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So let's go to Scotland now, where the King and Queen will be joined by the Princess Royal this afternoon as they host a garden party in Edinburgh on the second day of the monarch's visit to Scotland, his first Holyrood since becoming monarch.
The party, of course, is a traditional part of Holyrood Week this year, celebrating the coronation of Charles and Camilla. It comes after the King received the keys of the city yesterday and visited the decommissioned Royal Yacht Britannia, much loved, of course, by the late Queen.
So joining us now for an update on the King's visit is our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker in Edinburgh. Cameron, just tell us, what is Holyrood Week?
Well, Holyrood Week is the annual tradition where the monarch spends a week in the capital city of Edinburgh in residence at the Palace of Holyrood House and I suppose gets to know the local community with a number of engagements. It always starts with Ceremony of the Keys, which happened yesterday, where the King is symbolically handed the keys to the city of Edinburgh and his ancient and hereditary kingdom of Scotland. But of course, Bev, this year is extra special because there's going to be an official celebration of the King's coronation in Scotland, and he's going to be presented with the honours of Scotland and a service of Thanksgiving tomorrow in St Giles's Cathedral. But this morning, there's a little bit of a headache for the King and officials here, and that is because the co-leaders of the Scottish Green Party have rejected an invitation to attend that service of Thanksgiving in St Giles's Cathedral tomorrow. And one of them is due to speak at an anti-monarchist Republican rally tomorrow morning outside Holyrood in the Scottish Parliament. So it's Patrick Harvey and Lorna Slater. They're both members of the Scottish Parliament here in Edinburgh. And Mr Harvey, as I said, is due to speak outside of Holyrood at the Our Republic rally because he says the monarchy is out of date and an undemocratic institution. Well, a Scottish Tory spokesperson, Donald Cameron, has said the decision is akin to student politics. So clearly there are polarising views here in Scotland this week for Holyrood Week. There's also going to be a separate protest of Republic, those people with the big yellow signs led by Graham Smith. But some people perhaps are hoping that the pipes and drums are going to drown them out tomorrow with the pomp and pageantry of the procession. But yes, as you said, there's going to be a garden party in the garden of the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh a little bit later on. It's hosted by the King, the Princess Royal and the Queen as well. Weather, though, not looking great, to be perfectly honest. It's forecast to have thundery showers and it's going to be perhaps a bit of a downpour. But we're British, aren't we? We're used to the bad weather. So I'm sure all the guests who have been invited are still very excited to go. But let's just hope they've packed a few umbrellas.
Cameron Walker in Edinburgh for us. We're in the studio with Nigel Nelson, political commentator, and Tonya Buxton's here too. Nigel, a bit of a republicanism won't bother the King.
No, it won't. He's had plenty of it, and he always ignores it. I think it's a bit ill-mannered, actually, to do that.
But it is the Green Party.
Well, yes, there's always that. But, I mean, he is the king of the United Kingdom, at least for the time being, unless Scotland gets its independence.
Yeah. But they speak for a small group, I would say. What is the Republicans? 25%? Did you say? Is that was the latest?
I don't know. I don't know what the figures are. I mean, I still think that all the polls show that people want to actually retain the monarchy. So on the basis of that, I don't think the King's got a great deal to worry about.
Do you want to retain the monarchy?
I do, actually.
Oh, good.
Yes, but for constitutional reasons, I'm a monarchist, but I'm not a royalist.
Right. Because you don't. Because the alternative. What is the alternative?
Well, exactly. We have an elected. We have a
boring
president.
old unelected. Some boring old.
We have a president. Yeah.
Which we don't want. You're a monarchist, aren't you?
I am, of course.
Yeah, so am I. So's Bev.
Yeah, I am actually. Now, High Street Bank's Tonya signed up to the Stonewall scheme. We covered this a little bit yesterday, but we had to move on quite quickly, didn't we? Why are banks bothered about pleasing Stonewall?
OK, so let's just go back a little bit. Stonewall was a wonderful thing. During the time when it came to gay rights, they were a really important voice.
They were.
But then they got what they wanted, and we were all really happy about that. And that's when they became deviant, as far as I'm concerned. They've become deviant, and they're making discriminatory requests. And the fact that banks are signing on to pay their money to be told what to do about things that most of the population do not agree with is very, very wrong. I think Stonewall did its job. It did a brilliant job when it was needed, and now it needs to be disbanded, and no one should be giving them any money. And our banks in particular should not be making announcements like all genders can have babies.
Which is what the Bank of England did yesterday.
Just now.
At a time when interest rates are going through the roof, they've lost the fight against inflation, and they're banging on about that.
I mean, this really makes me wonder about... Do they give a damn about the common person? Do they give a damn about us? And also, it's quite discriminatory in the sense that poor priest, the vicar, who just said, look, I think it's a bit too much pride stuff going on, and had his building society account shut. Now, if that had been somebody else, some other minority, as it were, I don't think his thoughts are minority, actually, but another minority, that would have been complete discrimination. There would be legal cases. So I don't understand, who do the banks think they are? And they need to be regulated far more.
Nigel.
Well,
you're never going to defend the banks. You're never going to defend the banks.
I met Richard Fothergill, the priest you're talking about, on Saturday here at GBNews, that he was in with on Calvin Robinson's show, so you can see a replay of that. But I did ask him at the time, why on earth would he write to his bank about their trans policies? I mean, banks are for banking it.
Wasn't it because it was festooned with pride flags?
That's the reason he wrote there. But I would have thought, if you object to that, what you do is you go and bank somewhere else, and you give the reason to the bank why you're doing it, but you actually go elsewhere. When it comes to Stonewall, I mean, what they're doing is running diversity schemes within banks and the various other companies.
And within the government,
Well, the government are pulling out. I mean, the Cabinet Office have pulled out of these schemes, Department of Health has, and some other departments. And, of course, Stonewall get quite a lot of money for doing it. I'm not against that, someone like Stonewall running things like that. It seems to me a sensible thing to do. I don't like some of the things they come up with. I object to the idea of birthing parent instead of a mother, for instance. But the idea that experts should actually offer, and it's only guidance, offer diversity schemes seems like a good idea.
Why do we still need it, though, Nigel? I'm just thinking about, my children's generation. They just wouldn't need to ever be educated that you treat people the same regardless of how much melanin they have in their skin or who they choose to sleep with. It feels like it's all become a little bit out... These victories, thankfully, have been won.
Well, not completely, and I think that there's still an awful lot of unconscious bias around, so that's one problem. And I think when it comes to children, it's where they're educated. My kids went to an inner London primary school where a lot of the time the majority of the other children were black or Asian. The great thing about that is they didn't notice colour.
Yeah.
And when they describe one of their schoolmates, I was trying to think who they're describing because the colour never came into it, which shows,
I've had that
my
same
prejudice.
conversation with my children, which was like, you know, the one with the curly hair. I said, oh, you mean the mixed race girl?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. She was like, yeah, I suppose she is. That's how far we've come.
And that's why we don't need them anymore, so they need to come up with some more rubbish in order to keep making money.
And you see, the point is, as you made the point, Tonya, Stonewall did wreak great victories, and I was a member of Stonewall, and I've supported it, and it was fantastic. And they could have just said, we've done it, we've got equality for same-sex people, we're now going to close down honourably, but instead they latched onto the trans issue.
It's money.
Yeah.
Andrew, it's money. Otherwise, how else? They just want to continue making money, and from doing something that was very noble, they're now doing stuff that's ignoble, I feel. And so and also, who are banks to discriminate in this way? We know from what's happened now to Nigel Farage, and banks are becoming above their station. They are there to serve us, the people. I mean, when they get into trouble, we have to bail them out. Our taxes bail them out. So how dare they tell me what I'm to think? If it's not illegal or immoral or whatever, then it's not up to them to have this type of discrimination.
Yeah.
This, Nigel, is ESG.
Yes.
This is where ESG, environmental and social governance. So the idea that big corporations must tick boxes to show they are environmentally aware and that they are socially aware. And it's so important for these companies to meet this criteria. So, I mean, there's even, like, there's a list now, isn't there? There's a sort of ranking of where each company...
they have to
submit their ESG.
I mean, again, I don't see that should be a major problem. I mean, it goes with any company can do that. When it comes down to taking people's accounts away, like they've done to Nigel Farage, that has got to be wrong. Because the only reason a bank should ever take an account away is because there is some suspected illegality, like money laundering, and even worse is they don't give a reason.
But why do we need ESG? We never used to need ESG. We didn't used to want our banks and our big corporations to be constantly virtue signalling how good they were. We just want them to provide a good product or a good service at an affordable price and not rip us off.
But that comes back to in fact, to Stonewall and the diversity issue, that if you actually think that companies should operate proper diversity policies, that would be the reason. So the question is whether you think that they need to actually do that.
But the banks are out of control, aren't they? Tonya makes the point. I mean, I was staggered to read Dominic Lawson writing about his 16-year-old Down syndrome daughter who was denied a bank account when they sought to open it for her because her grandfather was the former Tory Chancellor, Nigel
How dare
Lawson.
they?
Astonishing.
How dare they?
Well, I mean, that is completely wrong. The idea that you refuse a bank account on political grounds is just not acceptable.
Yeah.
And at least the Treasury is now investigating, and the City Minister, Andrew Griffiths, will now look at that and see whether banks are behaving properly. Certainly on the surface of it, they're not.
Yeah, and apparently it's been going on for some time.
Yeah, and we've only just heard about it. And that's why, in fact, Nigel has actually blazing a trail on this one.
Nigel makes a noise.
Yes, indeed.
I wonder if his bank account would have been...
ashamed.
Yeah, but would he have lost his bank account if he'd backed Remain in the referendum, do you think, Tonya?
No, not at all. It's only one side of the argument that gets their bank accounts taken away. You know, if you have centre and right, that's it. You get your bank account taken away. But also, what it does when that happens is it causes shame to people. If I suddenly had my bank account taken away, it would really worry me. Would it affect my credit rating?
Yeah.
I would be thinking... Because all these stories now, these stories that are trying to say that Nigel's money laundering, all this stuff. No one's, you know, there's that MP who said it in Parliament.
Chris Brown,
because he can't be sued in Parliament. He won't dare say it outside of Parliament, though.
Saying he was in receipt of hundreds of thousands of pounds from Russia.
And that's what it says. It's wrong on every level.
Yeah. We've got the COVID inquiry going on at the moment, Tonya, and there's a piece in the Telegraph today written by Molly Kingsley, friend of the show, from the Us For Them organisation. And this is shocking. This is about the number of warnings the government got about how many children would die from suicide due to lockdown policy than they would from COVID. The numbers are eye-watering.
The numbers are eye-watering. The government had 9 opportunities to reverse this.
This is big warnings, effectively.
This is big warnings, and this is in England alone during the first year of lockdown. 161 10 to 19-year-olds committed suicide.
161.
169 children, as opposed to 34 deaths from COVID with children who already had comorbidities, so sick and unwell children. We always knew that the sick people had to be safeguarded. If I was one of these parents, and it's one of the reasons that I kind of got cancelled on terrestrial television, because a fan of mine who used to watch my shows messaged me, and her son committed suicide during the first lockdown, and she wanted to go on to terrestrial television, Good Morning Britain's or This Morning's of this, you know, Sky, and talk about the fact that her son had been isolated alone at home and ended up killing himself. But during that time, there was only COVID deaths. We weren't allowed to discuss children. Children got thrown under the bus.
And if it transpired, Nigel, that the government hadn't foreseen this cost versus benefit when it came to a young person, you might be able to forgive them. But what we're now finding out is they had 9 opportunities from different organisations and individuals who will know about this stuff, who said, be careful.
Yeah, I mean, 9 warnings.
9 warnings.
So on the basis of that, I mean, I think the COVID inquiry is looking into that now, whether it was right or needed to close schools at all. We have to rewind a bit to find out why they did that, which was broadly because the worry was that kids would take the disease back to vulnerable parents and grandparents.
But they very early on, Nigel, realised that that wasn't the case and that wouldn't happen, and that closing schools would have very little mitigation when it came to the transmission of the disease, and that if they were going to do it, that they also knew that they would have to lock down for really long periods of time, causing great harm to children, but they never expressed that. It's one of the things that Molly Kingsley said with the Us For Them group, is that they never expressed it to us, the public, that if we're going to shut schools even for 1 month, it's not going to be 1 month, it's going to be
It had to be a long period. But that's for the COVID inquiry. I mean, the COVID inquiry will actually pronounce on that.
The COVID inquiry is a joke.
Well, it shouldn't be a joke, because, I mean, if there's another pandemic, we need to know how to handle it better than the last one.
But, Nigel, we had to force them to discuss children within the COVID inquiry. They didn't. They weren't even interested.
It wasn't in the original terms, but it now is.
Yeah.
It's because we've made so much noise about it.
We've got some breaking news to bring you right now.
Oh, good. Yeah. Thames Water has been fined £3.3 million at Lewis Crown Court after pleading guilty to 4 charges relating to polluting rivers near Gatwick in 2017. Don't pass that £3 million on, though, to customers of Thames Water. That should come out of the directors' pockets.
Yes, it should.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also, we've been talking this morning about our campaign to prevent a cashless society. We are all very happy about it here. It's on our website, gbnews.com/cash, or if you've got a smartphone, use it to click on the QR code on your screen right now to take you to the petition. When we came on air today...
36,000.
30,000, wasn't it?
30,000, I think, yeah.
I think we had 30,000 when we came on air today. You are wonderful out there, because as of now, we have 46,000 signatures on our petition. We are on our way to 100,000.
Yeah.
That would help GB News with our campaign. And we were going to tell the authorities, do not kill cash.
So, Nigel, sign the petition.
Yeah, well, indeed. No, I agree with this.
Sonia will have already signed it.
Tweet it, sign it, tweet it, tell everybody about it, talk about cash, use cash.
Yeah.
In your
Insist on using cash.
I do it all the time.
Insist on it.
All the time.
Yeah, you've had a few instances, haven't you, when you've gone to restaurants?
Yeah, we've just left the cash and left.
Exactly
Arrest us, we're not
That's
paid
it.
by card.
We've come to the end of our show. Coming up next is the live desk with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson. We'll be back with Britain's Newsroom tomorrow at 9:30. See you then.
Hi there, Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers once again for many of us today. Prolonged rain for some, especially towards the south, but sunny spells in between a few of the showers. We've got low pressure still in control of our weather. Low pressure sitting to the north of the UK. Another low developing to the south, along with a frontal system likely to push up some heavy and prolonged rain through the course of the day for southern counties, and certainly some lively showers about early afternoon before that prolonged rain sets in across the southwest and then into the south of England, perhaps affecting South Wales as well later on. Otherwise, for the Midlands, North Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, it's a mix of bright spells and showers. Some of the showers will be heavy, odd rumble of thunder, and it's going to feel cool with temperatures generally 17 to 20 Celsius, although somewhere like the East Midlands, East Anglia, before the rain sets in, could reach 21 or 22 Celsius. But it is going to turn wetter across the south and southeast into East Anglia through the evening. That rain slow to clear during the early hours of Wednesday. A gusty wind through the Channel and towards the south.